Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, July 10th, 2023, and this is episode 766 of Living Free in Tennessee. And we're going live a little bit later on a Monday than usual to record this episode. I was out of town last week. I was back in town. I then got to go to the vampire to get blood taken this morning, so everything was a little bit weird. Don't worry, I'm not sick that I know of. It's just sort of an annual check on the blood levels, and I needed to get that done. So I fasted last night and I got it done this morning, and that was the best cup of coffee I've had in weeks, just for the record, because it was delicious having put it off till about 10 or 11 in the morning. Anyway, today I wasn't sure what we should talk about because I've got lots of ideas about what I'd like to share with y'all, and I will be sharing some things this week, but it's a Monday episode. So I asked over on the Telegram group. If you are not connected with the Living Free in Tennessee social networks, we have a Telegram group, we have a MeWe group, we have a Facebook group, and they are fairly active. So I went over to Telegram and I said, hey, what do you guys want to hear about today? And Micah piped up with lessons learned from podcasting. How do I start a podcast? What gear do I use? How does it fit to the workflow? How do you streamline things? Like, what do you know about podcasting? Turns out I've been podcasting for 7 years. So we're doing lessons learned about 7 years of podcasting. For those of you who are here for the live recording of the show, hello. First of all, Pippinized, Chris and Faith, hello. I see you're putting comments in there. If you have a question as we go, today's a really good episode to make sure you put the first couple of words in all caps so I can mark it to answer, especially when we're talking about a topic like this, where I may cover some things and think I covered all of it, and then you pop up with another question. That's the best way to get my attention. Otherwise, I assume that you are all talking to each other, and welcome to the talk today, A. Rapier, AR, as I like to call you. Anyway, so that's what's up. Now, before we jump into that, I did want to talk about our featured event of today's show, and that is the Self-Reliance Festival in Camden, Tennessee, October 14th and 15th. It's going to be a really good time. We've got great vendors coming out. We've got great speakers coming out. We've got great demonstrations happening. And you just don't want to miss this, guys. It's the best way to find community, build community, learn a thing or two, and just have an all-around good time with people that you're going to like being around. Selfreliancefestival.com is where you grab tickets. They are at early bird prices through the end of the month, and they are refundable minus your transaction fee for the credit card payment up until August 15th. So if you're not quite sure, get your ticket anyway at the early bird price. I don't think fees are more than about $4.50, $5. So, it's a $5 insurance policy to save $20 off the ticket price. Of course, if you're going all in, there's a mega pass where you can take 0 to Hero with ham radio. You can add the homesteading wound care add-on, which is going to be an on-site workshop for 4 hours done by Chuck Peoples about how to keep somebody alive after you've stopped the bleed. And you get the Monday chicken processing class that's with Joel Salatin. That's the mega pass. You can check that all out over at selfreliancefestival.com. I also do want to thank today's show sponsors. The first one is John Pugliano of the Wealth Studying Podcast. John Pugliano has been supportive of me and all of my efforts since we got to know each other at Jack Spirko's spring workshop when he used to do a spring workshop. I did a coffee roasting demo, and John came up to me, and we just started talking, and I realized that I, A, should be listening to his podcast, and B, he had a lot of thought put into how he makes his decisions financially. So I made friends with him. He started coming to my spring workshop, and he's been at every one except for the first one. And he's coming to Self-Reliance Festival to speak in October. So really great guy. His podcast is fantastic. Definitely something you can build into your week. And if you're not ready to invest yet, it's still a really good one to listen to as you educate yourself on how to make financial decisions with the long-term view in mind. And if you are investing money, definitely perspective you want to check out. That's the Wealth Studying Podcast. You can find out a direct link to that podcast at investiblewealth.com, or take your podcatcher on your phone and look up the Wealth Studying podcast. You'll totally find it. Our second sponsor of today's show is Senior Chief Electric. And Senior Chief Electric, who advertises mostly through their Facebook page. So I have a link to that in the show notes. And it's also on the YouTube notes too, guys, if you're seeing this live. Does great electrical work, stands by his work, and has been infinitesimally helpful to getting the Holler Roasting Shack, like the Holler Roast Roasting Shack, up and running, as well as a bunch of other stuff here. This is somebody who stands behind his work and just insists on quality and shows up when he says he's going to show up. These are three things that are hard to find in an electrician. Senior Chief Electric. Thank you to our sponsors. Finally, if you want to send in a Stump the Sauce question or a frugality tip or whatever, you can email me, Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com. That's Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com. I have one question from the audience that I think I should take right now from Pip and I's off question on SRF. Any logical idea on how many gift bags will be given out? I'd like to put some rubber ducks and duction cups. Okay, so we have done swag bags in the past. I think what we're doing this time, Pip and I's, is sending people to your booth to get the swag to pick it up. So we have traditionally done 200 swag bags in the past. I would say 200 is a good number of giveaways if you're wanting to do giveaways, but you can choose your number in this way. And we just thought it would be a better way to connect people with the vendors is to give them like a little treasure hunting card to go, find the different booths and get the giveaways for this Self-Reliance Festival. It was something, I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner, but that A, it saves us having to stuff the bags, which is great for the staff, and B, the reason vendors are there is for you to see their booth, and you'll see their booth if you go get the free things. Anyway, our live stream schedule this week is back to normal, except Jack Spirko is on the Tuesday live, and that means we're starting at 9:30 tomorrow instead of 12:30. So that's happening. Jack Spirko, John Willis, 9:30 Tuesday. Thursday at 7 p.m. Central, we will be doing the Self-Reliance Festival bi-weekly live stream. And Friday at 10:30 Central a.m., Homestead Happenings, live from the Holler Homestead. That's the live stream schedule. It's time for our first segment of today's show, and that's Tales from the Prepper Pantry, where we talk about storing what you use and using what you store. And my nose itches today. I don't know why. It's like there's a hair up. I know you guys wanted to know that. I like to overshare. That's why I'm a podcaster. Anyway, the Prepper Pantry came into my life just as a logical extension of living out in the country. Like, you just have to think ahead because it's not super convenient to drive 25 or 35 minutes to the store to get something. And then you spend the time in the store, and then you have to drive back from the store. And so I started just rotating through, and then as I started growing more food on the homestead and canning things, I realized there was a whole seasonality to the Prepper Pantry. Well, let's fast forward. In 2020, I kicked into high gear on food production here. I had kind of backed off on what I was growing on the homestead. And I realized that with the supply chain issues, it would be a good idea to kick it into high gear. So I did. And now I hardly need to go to the store. I bought heavy whipping cream this week because my milk share, my herd share, is not enough to give me what I want for my coffee. And they are too busy to separate the milk from the cream for customers. So I get a half gallon of raw milk every week, and I separate that cream out myself, which is enough for about 3 days. I really wish I could buy heavy whipping cream from them, but I can't. So that means that I get that, I separate the cream, I feed the skim milk to my chickens, and then I buy additional heavy whipping cream at the store. You may wonder why I don't just get a gallon and a half of milk and skim it. It's because I don't have a cream separator. And so it's actually it's a pain in the neck for me to separate the cream I am separating. So anyway, that is the deal. But, that transition took years. And I think when people first come to Living Free in Tennessee, they're like, oh, I don't know if I can ever get there. Well, you know what it started with, guys? It started with me knowing what was in my pantry, organizing it in a way where I could put the newer items on the back of the shelf and the older items in the front, have an idea of how many there were, and having a system of long-term and short-term storage. So when I came out of long-term to short-term storage, I marked it down and resupplied. And in this way, I always had a cushion. And those of you who have been here since the first podcast came out know that when I quit my job without a real plan about how I was going to pay for my life, that first year, I lived off my pantry without resupplying it. And because it was there, it was like a savings account of food and a savings account of medical and paper supplies. And yes, I did have to go to the store that year, but no, not very much. And that really helped me from a financial standpoint, not get myself into trouble. So, just that transition alone was empowered by the Prepper Pantry. And that's where I think reasoned pantry management is a really great way to set yourself up with just one more area where you're resilient, because financial resilience and savings is important. But if you have a savings account of food or a savings account of clothing or a savings account of medical supplies or a savings account of dog food or whatever it is, that's just something you don't have to buy when things go bad. And the most likely thing to happen to many of us are two things: is a medical issue in our family. We're watching this happen with Jenny, right? Or a job loss. And these are things we can weather. But boy, isn't it nice when you have that extra stuff. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the Prepper Pantry today. I moved and inventoried last year's canned goods into the area in my mudroom where I pull from most often. So the easiest place to get canned goods is my mudroom. And I have other storage areas. One is above the wall to my right while I'm presenting here. I have lots of different places I store canned goods. And I like to put like things like each other, like all the pickled beets with each other, except in the mudroom, I do that. And it's the older like stuff. So my goal is to use my food within 2 years of processing it. 1 year for most canned goods is good enough for me. And that's why I can about 60 quarts of green beans, for example, a year when I can. And it does boil down to this time of year, because I've just taken out the canner for the first time this week and canned some stuff. Well, I mean, I guess that's not true. I canned some stuff before I went to Montana, but I took out the stovetop canner, which means I canned lots of stuff, because the electric canner does like 5 quarts at a time, and that was a small canning project. So I took that out and I realized, I need to put these jars of things somewhere. And that means that I've got to get the area where I store canned goods in order. Well, when I ripped out my kitchen this winter, I also put jars and boxes at base camp in the basement to get them out of the way, because we tore cabinets out where I store my canned goods. And so I had all those boxes like piled up in here, ready to unload. I went through all of them, sorted everything. That's what I actually did. So I came back from Montana, and that's what I did this weekend. Was I futzed in the garden, and I got that under control, because I knew if I didn't have that stability going into canning season, I was going to be in a world of hurt and lose stuff. Crystal says, happy 7 years. May was my 7-year anniversary, I just realized, but I thought about how long I've been pocketing. We're getting near the 10-year anniversary, guys. It's going to happen. It's going to go down. And we're going to have to do something for that whole celebration. So that was all done. And as a part of that, I did inventory. I counted how many jars of stuff I have still from last year. And I have a significant amount of bone broth canned, like 43 quarts. And that's because I have a tendency to can the bone broth, use some fresh, and then there are more bones to make bone broth with. So we are being more strategic here about using up our bone broth. And I'm hearing a MeWe notification, so we're just going to close that. Anyway, more purposeful about using the bone broth, because it's really good to get that collagen in your system. Usually when I make a stew, I'm using a bone-in piece of meat, but I'm going to make some summer stews, I think, with bone broth and start using that up. And then I sent some down to Tactical, so he'll start using it. And of course, that said, I also put up about 18 quarts of chicken bone broth from the spines from the chicken and the feet from the chicken processing class. So there's a lot of bone broth coming in. I feel like something's out of balance with living off the food that we're creating if I can't keep up with the bone broth usage. And I have this issue with tallow too. So it's just something I'm thinking about, like, how can I use these things that we're creating, because I don't want them to go to waste. And if I'm getting that much bone broth ratio, maybe that means I should adjust my diet. So we'll see how that goes. I did put 21 jars of green beans up over the weekend. That's the other thing I was doing this weekend, was canning green beans. Some of those came from my garden. I actually had the opportunity to buy a half bushel at the farmer's market of really good looking green beans. So I grabbed those as well, put up 21 jars. And my next segment on beans is going to be dilly beans, because I only have 2 pints of dilly beans left from last year. And I'd like to have 10 or 12 of those to, people who come here know that I put out pickled things, pickles, pickled beets, dilly beans, pickled okra, that sort of thing. So that's happening. Beets did really poorly in my garden this year, so I don't think I'm putting up any of those unless I come across the beet whisperer somewhere in my wanderings. I'm going to try to plant fall beets and see how that goes. So I'm going to put some shade cloth over an area, put beet seeds in, and see if I can get them to germinate that way. What happened this year is they took a really long time to germinate. Then they germinated, and then it was really dry. And I was traveling a lot, so they didn't get watered as much as they needed to at that moment. So a bunch of them didn't make it. So I did a second planting. Same thing happened. Now, if I had just put more beets in and then gone to Montana, it very kindly rained every other day while I was gone. But, I didn't do that. So we'll look at that. On the other hand, my carrots did well this year. Had I planted a lot of carrots, I would have had a lot of carrots, but usually I don't have a lot of success with carrots. So the weather was great for carrots this year, and apparently not great for beets this year on my schedule. I also got to use the AllAmerican pressure canner that was gifted to me by Eric and his wife at Self-Reliance Festival in October. He brought it to me, and I love it. And I hadn't, he brought it to me at the end of canning season. So it's been just like sitting there on the shelf all winter long. Got to bring that out and use it for the first time. It worked great. And because I hadn't used it, I wasn't sure if I was going to completely replace my Presto pressure canners, stovetop Presto pressure canners. Say that 10 times fast. I have 3 of them. The reason I have 3 of them is every time somebody tries canning and hates canning, they buy one of those puppies. And when they decide they hate canning, I end up with it. And I sort of have kept them around because I'll use 2 of them at a time. Sometimes when I have a lot of green beans or something to can or pickle. And I realized that with the addition of the AllAmerican canner in my life, the Presto pressure canners are going to be for sale except for one. So I really only want 2, maximum 2 stovetop pressure canners. And that's a lot. Like, you don't need to have all this stuff unless you're doing high volumes like I'm doing. Okay. And classes. So I want to have the Presto style to be able to show people the difference between the 2, because not everybody can put $300 or $500 into an AllAmerican canner. So you want to be able to show them how to use the Presto. And B, it's a way of life to do a lot of canning, and people got along for many years with just one stovetop pressure canner, where groups of people would come over and do canning all day long and just keep it going. So you're perfectly fine with one pressure canner. I use more than one pressure canner when I'm going, and I use an electric, and I borrow any neighbor's electric that I can borrow if I get high volumes. And I feel like with the change in how my schedule has been, that's going to happen less and less often, because it's very hard for me to dedicate 2 days back to back to Canning Palooza, as much as I love to do that. However, I still do classes. So I'm going to keep 2, but that means I'm going to have 2 for sale and or whatever. Maybe we'll give them into the network if nobody wants to buy them. I'll talk more about that as we go. And then I also wanted to mention, speaking of food preservation and canning, it is the time of year when surplus comes on. So this time of year, we're putting food away. We're drying food. We're fermenting food. If you're fermenting food, do it in a cool place. So it's not necessarily the best time of year to ferment food unless you have air conditioning, which I do. So I usually, like in a typical cycle, you would be waiting to ferment your food till the fall at this point. You would have either done it in the early spring, or you would be doing it September, October, November, when temperatures come back down for fermentation, or you would have a cave. And if you have a cave, then that's fine. There's two reasons for that. One, if you're using fermentation as a way of preserving food and you're not refrigerating it after that, so you use fermentation, it acidifies the things you ferment, and you put it away for the winter, it doesn't store as long that way as, for example, in a ball jar after it's been canned. So you would want that to happen as late in the season as possible so it lasts as long through the winter as possible. That's one thing. And two, it's the temperature thing. If you're fermenting foods in the middle of summer, they go too fast, and things go wrong when they go too fast. Next up, we have a frugality tip, and this one comes from Clydesdale Homestead, who I got to meet in person in Spokane, Washington last week. It was fun to have a meetup in Spokane. We had a great time. Okay, so they created a DIY, quick, inexpensive way to pit cherries. Now, you can spend all sorts of money on cherry pitters, or you can go down to the thrift store and buy some forks for 25 cents each and bend the two outer tines down. And then at the very end of the two inner tines, just make a 90-degree little ledge up there. And that makes a better, faster cherry pitter than many of the commercial options. They just happened to have it with them and showed it to me. So that is a way to both save money and time aggravation when you're pitting your cherries. And apparently it's cherry season in places in the world where we can grow cherries. Jealous. I'm a little jealous because I really like cherries. Anyway, if you hear that description and you're like, what? There is a photograph in the show notes, which if you're on the live stream will be up about 15 minutes after we're done recording today's episode. And you can just check that out. Also, there is a link to the video that Clydesdale Homestead did about the cherry pitter if you want to like see more in depth about how it works. I watched it. It's a great video. It's like, I don't know, 3-4 minutes long, fast watch, and it shows you exactly what's going on. Next up, we have Operation Independence, where we talk about spending less money, getting more local revenue, that sorts of like learning a skill so you don't have to pay a guy, so you don't have to earn the money, plus the taxes you're going to pay on the money, all of those things. This segment really came around because I was trying to pay off my debt. And in order to pay off the debt, you got to work on both sides of the equation, right? You got to spend less and you got to earn more. And that really helps you pay off debt. And you have to be disciplined about it. And so I started just like I gamified the process so that it'd be like, haha, I saved $1.50 in gas by not drying my clothes in the dryer today or whatever. This time of year, guys, I hang my clothes out and they don't really get all the way dry because it's so humid outside, unless like today it's sunny. So they're going to get dry today. Is anything hung out? Not really. Something will be after this podcast. So I'll end up putting them in the dryer for 10 minutes after they've been outside for a day, and that just sort of finishes off. That's how you don't mildew your clothes in this particular climate. If you are in a drier climate like Montana, then you don't have this problem. But I've noticed in Tennessee in the summer, that's actually when I'm more likely to use my dryer because it takes all of the humidity out. Anyway, I wanted to talk about fast food. This week, we've really been working on fast food. And what I mean by that is this. When you're on a trip or you're having a busy day, sometimes we go to fast food. You pull the McDonald's ripcord or Arby's or Subway or whatever. A lot of people have their preferred fast food. Sorry for drinking in your ear. I just was getting a scritch in my throat. So I've been thinking a lot about fast food because I feel terrible if I eat fast food. So I don't eat fast food. And I just got through a trip where I brought all of my food with me. And it was freeze-dried food that I could just add water to, which was super handy and very fortunate because it turned out the Airbnb I was staying in was 10 miles from the nearest store in the wrong direction where I was going to Paul Wheaton's. So I could have made that work, but I did not have to make that work because I had food with me, so I was fine. But the other thing about fast food is setting yourself up at home for fast food. Yesterday, I went swimming in the afternoon, swam laps, and on my way home, I stopped by Aldi and I got some heavy whipping cream, and I noticed that they had cauliflower crust pizza. We didn't have cauliflower crust pizza, but I grabbed two and threw them in my freezer because I know that someday in the future it's going to get busy, or I'm going to be going out of town, or I'll be out of town and Tactical will be here on his own. And it's going to be a fast food day because the sheep got out and there's no time to cook. So by thinking ahead for that, that's something that can just be grabbed out of the freezer. Likewise, I reverse engineered, with the help of Chef Brett, the recipe for the Salisbury steaks that he served at my spring workshop. And I'm doing this because I'm working on putting together like a recipe list or a cook booklet of the things we had at this year's spring workshop because people like them so much. And that one, he did not have a recipe for, he just made it. And it was a keto friendly version of Salisbury steak, which means no carbs were added. We used freeze dried mushroom to thicken the broth, and he used freeze dried mushrooms and eggs to make the beef stick to itself. And the deal was, it was so tasty that like people are still talking about it. So I made that yesterday, and I made it with a quart of bone broth that I had made at home, which was beef broth, which is also what was in the spring workshop stuff. It was, I think that's part of it, is the quality ingredients going in. Like, it was beef, it was my beef, and it was bone broth from my beef, and it was garlic from my property, and it was pepper that I bought. Like all of those ingredients that went in, and the mushrooms came from the store. They weren't stuff I sourced. If I had found enough mushrooms to do that, I would have, but we had to freeze dry store mushrooms. But as a result, I ended up with a whole nother, like, enough Salisbury steak gravy for a whole nother set of it. And I made like 3 pounds of it yesterday. And the redneck ate like 2 pounds and I ate a pound. Yes, I eat that much meat. And it was delicious, but because I had that extra, I was able to put it in a container in a special place in my freezer that's sort of dedicated to grab and go meals. And next time I need fast food, I literally can pull that out and chunk it out as an ice cube into a pot and put it on warm, and take some hamburger patties, even if they're not spiced as Salisbury steak, and like heat those, pour it over it, and it's done. And that will take less time than it takes to go to the fast food restaurant. Plus, it's healthier. Plus, it costs less, right? Because I don't have a lot of money into the Salisbury steak situation by the time we get to it. So that's something I just was thinking about as an operation independence thing, because my options would be spend $50 or $60 at the Mexican place at the marina, or go to somewhere like Arby's, and I'm still going to spend $25 there, guys. And when you think about the fact that what I just described to you is probably $8 for the meal that's in, that's not a, like, that amount of money is not a make or break you amount of money on one day. But when it gets into the 100 days phase of the year, it starts adding up. And the other thing is, when I was at my uncle's funeral, asked another one of my uncles, like, how do you travel so gracefully? Because I always like get really tired after I travel. And he said, hi K-Bonk. He said, I just, I have faith that I can get anything I need wherever I go. So I don't worry about if I packed or what I forgot. And I was like, that's kind of brilliant, because it's true. If you forget to pack your underwear, you can go buy underwear just about anywhere. Ask me how I know. That has actually happened to me before. I had to wear like my workout shorts under my clothes one time because I went somewhere and I was like, I think I need to go to the store. Anyway, and that may not seem like an Operation Independence thing, but it sort of is. Because in order to empower myself to eat healthy and to keep things frugal in Montana, I went to Montana and spent $40 or $50 on things at Walmart that I could not bring with me on the plane, like a knife. And I gave that knife to Tori. And I'm totally going to borrow it back from her if I come back through Spokane to go to Montana next year. But anyway, I bought a cooler to keep some things cold. And then I bought an ice pack and a flashlight and some other stuff I just couldn't fit in a bag to carry on. And then some things to augment my freeze-dried food. So it was really nice to have fresh cheese, fresh heavy whipping cream, and some other stuff. So in this case, I spent $50 to save myself going out to eat. And that's something just to think about when you're on the road. You can, like bring your camp stove and all that. It's really easy in the car, but when you fly, it's not so much as easy to bring everything you want. And Letty says, I'm so glad I'm not the only one who's forgotten my underwear on a trip. Yep. It's happened to a lot of people. Pippin Eyes wants to know how 75 hard is going. I have, I think, 8 more days right now. And it's going well. Yesterday was actually, I thought my hardest day would be the day I flew back from Spokane because my flight was at 5 in the morning. And that was hard. It was hard to get enough water. It was hard to get 2 workouts in. Everything about that day was hard, but I had like 2 months to figure out how I was going to make that happen. And I made it happen. Yesterday, I woke up with a sore throat. And I was like, crap, if I get sick this close to the end, I don't know what I'm going to do. Because like when you have the flu or something and body aches, it's legitimately difficult to work out. I'll probably get the gallon of water down in that situation, but man. So I stayed in bed an extra 15 minutes. I got up, I walked, and I made myself a really cool tea out of things I harvested from my hillside garden. So I had echinacea, I had mullein, I had chocolate mint, and I had red clover flower. And I made that tea instead of coffee yesterday morning. And I don't know if it was just getting up and walking or that tea, but I felt great the rest of the day. I've been continuing to drink some of that tea a little bit because I made 16 ounces of it here and there throughout today. And I may make a second batch tomorrow. And I haven't gotten sick. So that's good. I just got 8 more days of getting through, and then I will have made 75 hard. And I have it's going to take a lot to keep me from getting this done at this point. Like I probably would have to be in the hospital in order for it to fail. And the brilliant thing about the challenge is the closer you get to the end, the more it hurts if you fall off the wagon. And that being said, it has helped me with some habits. I think the biggest thing is I'm better at saying no to things I know I'm not really going to get done. So, and that was one of the things I wanted to address. And also not, I haven't been keeping my priorities as in mind as I should for my 3 things on really the do or die things getting done every day. So that was what I was addressing with it. I lost 2 sizes as well. So I did lose some weight. I've been at a plateau for 3 weeks now, though. So the weight loss stopped about 3 weeks ago, for what that's worth. Anyway, it's time for the main topic of today's show. Lessons learned from 7 years of podcasting. This one comes from Micah over on the Telegram group. How about podcasting, equipment, guest form, interview tips, how it fits with the business, how it incorporates with other areas of life, etc. Podcast, software, and workflow. Everybody always asks about equipment when they ask about podcasts. Remember, guys, if you're going to ask a question, first couple words in all caps so I see it, because I won't necessarily see it. These eyes are 50 years old. They're about to be 51. Anyway, everybody always asks about, what mic do you use? I'm using a different mic today than the mic I usually use. How's the audio? Let me know in the comments what you think the audio is like. I did that on purpose for this podcast. They want to know about equipment, software, how to get it done, how to make an RSS feed, all of the how-to stuff. And I'm here to tell you the how it happens matters a lot less than the actual happening of the podcast. Faith says it sounds good. That's my point. Look, 2 different mics still sound good. This mic is a wireless mic. I have the mic below my mouth so I don't pop filter you, so the P's are going up over it. And I have my hair away so it's not hitting it, and I have a wireless transmitter up there that catches the signal from this. It will run out of batteries in 2 hours or so, based on what we did for Jenny's live feed. So this thing cost me $30. $30. This mic is a $250 to $300 mic that I already had for recording rock and roll music because I'm a singer. It's a condenser mic. It's a Rode NT1. It's going through the same box. It's actually not on right now. It's a condenser mic. It goes through the same translator box that helps it go to my computer. However, they make mics that go straight to your computer. The reason I even have that thing that allows me to go mic to USB is I already had this mic and I thought, well, instead of spending money on a microphone, I'll just get a Scarlett Solo box and be done with it. But does that really matter? No. What really matters, it did the robot thing when you got the transmitter too close. Yeah, that can happen. What really matters is that you start your podcast. If you go back and listen to my first few episodes, I think first 8 episodes, I already owned the mic. I did not have a way to translate it to my computer. I had not figured out how to do that. And what you got was Nicole Sauce talking over the built-in mic on her computer. A couple of times I did it like over Zello on my phone just to get it done. So the lesson from that is once you start, you will start developing the habit. You'll start building your audience, and your sound might not be ideal. And your posts may not be ideal. And you may not be a super polished podcaster yet. None of it matters. What really matters is decide what you're going to podcast about and start doing it on a regular basis. That is the number one most important thing. Everything else will come if you can just do that. And most people who fail at podcasting fail because they get stuck trying to make their audio perfect or never say or they end up, I don't know, feeling shy about the quality of what they're doing. And I don't know if I should put that out there or not. Or they record it but don't produce it. That's a thing. That's like doing your homework but not turning it in. A thing I used to do on the regular basis when I was in government schools, by the way. I would do my homework and not turn it in because the teacher did not deserve to see it. Well, if you do that with your podcast, then you'll never produce a podcast. So making it happen is what matters the most. And consistency and predictability really helps. And I say this having come off of 3 weeks of having a completely up in the air, ever-changing schedule of podcasting. This hurts my podcast when that happens, guys. It hurts my YouTube rankings. I notice fewer downloads. And as long as I keep doing everything moving forward on a consistent basis, the numbers come back up. But what happens is people listen to your podcast, and if you don't have at least one episode once a week, they don't come back to it. Right? They don't come back to it. So consistency and predictability really helps. Plus, what happens over time is you develop a community and they're expecting your Friday podcast to come out on Friday. And then when it doesn't come out on Friday, they're like, what the heck, Nicole? Is the podcast feed broken? And sometimes it is, but usually Nicole is broken, right? So if that's why it's actually better to do a weekly podcast than to do an everyday podcast and fail at it most of the time. Because if you're coming out every Monday or every Saturday or something, and it's once a week, it's something you can build in and still have a job and do all of those things. And it's predictable. Now, if you're able to do more frequency than that, that is something that will work in your favor. Because I will say this, had I had 5 days a week content when I started this podcast, I would have built audience a lot faster. I just delayed it by a factor of 1/20th by doing that. And Faith says, we miss you when you're gone. Yeah, I know. I had a lot of things going on in the background the last 3 weeks. But once that's done, somebody asked me the other day how my Monday segments came to be. And the answer is people ask me questions and I realized, that would make a good segment. And gosh, my life would be easier if I had segments every day, every Monday, because it was a weekly podcast to begin with. And So, developing categories or segments will help keep your focus. And that's really nice. So, if you're doing a 3-day a week podcast and Monday's reactions to the news, and Wednesday is following up on your ferment projects, and Friday is a freestyle talk with your audience, do that. That will help you focus on your content, and then you're not like, you don't have blank page syndrome where like this is, you get up and this is what you're looking at. This is the problem of every podcaster. We get up and this is what we're looking at. And there's nothing on this page and there's no guidelines on this page, and we're like, what am I going to talk about today? Now for me, that's not usually a hindrance. Every so often I really can't think of something, but it does put you like, if on this piece of paper is Tales from the Prepper Pantry, Frugality Tip, Operation Independence, Stump the Sauce, which hasn't been back in a long time. Somebody needs to send me in Stump the Sauce questions so we can bring that one back. It's a lot easier to get going. Or if like today I talk about homesteading stuff. That's why I like Friday's homesteading stuff. I can just go through all the homesteading things. People are really interested in my homesteading journey. But then if I want to talk about something more spiritual or more independence related or freedom related or podcasting related, I can do that on Monday. And then I have interview shows, right? That all really helps keep your focus. Some people really like to write out every word they're going to say and they read it. And if you listen to my early podcasts, you can tell when I was just talking versus when I was reading. To this day, you can tell. Like when I'm reading the shopping report, you can tell I'm reading the shopping report. It's not my particular talent to read and not sound like I'm reading. So just be aware that scripting is, if you're very anxious about making mistakes, it can be a really good tool for you. But it can also make you sound kind of boring. And it can also lead you into mistakesville where you start freaking out because you said a word wrong, because you will, or you'll stutter, or you'll say anyway. And all of those things, I think, happen more frequently with scripting versus having an outline. Like today, I have an outline of bullets of things I want to cover. And it's just a few words to remind me what to talk about. And along the way, I will go off on tangents, and you guys like that about me. Other people, when they go off on tangents and then don't come back, really bother you, right? And maybe some of you get bothered when I go off on tangents. I don't know. You probably left already if you didn't like that. So an outline helps me come back to the point when I've gone off on a tangent. It's like an anchor. And then there's winging it. You've seen me do open mic with Nicole. Squirrel sauce, that's right. Like sometimes it's just Nicole unplugged and I go off on a thing and it's from the heart. Everything's from the heart, but like it's just like from the heart. I didn't have time. Like I think sometime in the last 3 weeks I was like, I don't have it in me. I don't even know what's in the segments, but let's talk about the segments and we're just going to do it. Winging it, I think, works well. For me, it's better to have an idea in advance of what I'm going to talk about, especially if it's something like how to can beets, and to make sure I get all the measurements right when I send that to you or talk to you about that. But winging it can be a really fresh look too. And I think that a combination of those things has worked best for me, but you're going to find something different. So the biggest thing is categories and segments really help you focus and get your stuff together. But if you script everything, it can get pretty tedious, and I think it takes away from the sort of the fresh, unplugged feel of podcasts. And then you will find the best way that works for you as far as what to put in your show notes, how much to put in your show notes. Do you pull stuff up and show it? I'm probably going to start showing you more things visually as we go further into this year. That's my plan anyway, when I'm talking about something, so you can see the things that we're talking about if you're on the live stream. A big mistake a lot of people make is they decide, I'm too scared to do this alone. I want to have a partner in crime. I'm going to have a co-host for this podcast. Let's go. Now, this works if you're married, Aaron, Two Chicks Homestead. But means that you are tying yourself to somebody else and you're dependent on them to show up. And if the podcast is more important to you than your co-host, that I've seen a lot of podcasts start with 2 people and end up with 1 person because the other person didn't show up. And if you look at Unloose the Goose, which was a lot of people, there were some of us who showed up consistently, and there were some of us who no-showed at the last minute or who didn't show up at all for months at a time. And that was part of why Unloose the Goose had to end, because the few motivated people were keeping it together, but the promise of somebody coming and then having them not show up on that show was really harmful, I think, to the reputation of the podcast. And also, I mean, like, how many times can you say, here's a problem in society? Oh, agorism solves that problem. There was that issue too. But it was more, I think, by nature of having so many declared hosts and dependent on the Flake Factor, I think that was a challenge there. And I've seen this with some other group podcasts where they start, it goes for a while, and then the group members sort of lose interest, and then the podcast ends. So just think about that. If you're going to start a podcast, do you really want to link yourself to somebody? Can you really trust them? Or is that going to get you in trouble? Yeah, K-Bonk, I miss the geese chats too. There's a lot of stuff I'd love to talk about. On the other hand, I get to talk to Jack Spirko and a number of guests on the Tuesday Live, and it's, you know, it's not Unloose the Goose by title, but if you think about it, it's Unloose the Goose. It's just we have rotating people coming through, and John Willis and I are standard there. But, you know, someday he may decide he wants to do something else with that hour or 2 of his time every Tuesday. Who knows, you know? That's how things evolve over time. If we think about keeping the process streamlined, though, so here's the other key to success. If you're going to do more than 1 show a week and you have other things to do with your life, like run a homestead or roast coffee or go out and train people on things, all of which I do, it's really important to get very streamlined and guarded with your time, because you can waste a lot of time producing your audio. Now, CJ Kilmer produces a really great podcast, and it has like musical segments. I'm pretty sure he plays and records the music for those. And his audio is on point. And I think he does a lot of like different takes for things. He does a ton of research for every episode. He puts out some quality stuff. That dude probably has 4 or 5 times the hours in per hour out that I do. And both podcasts are good. Both podcasts are listened to. He does not commit to a daily podcast schedule, or I commit to 3 times a week, right? And sometimes you get 4 or 5, just depends on the week. I commit to a larger volume, and if I was going to spend 4 to 5 times the amount of time getting ready for shows that I did now, that would not be a possible thing. So I had to think about what are some ways that I can keep this as efficient as possible. And if you come into your podcast with that in mind, that really helps you in the long run balance producing podcasts and getting them out on a schedule and all of that. So some things I've learned over the time: the guest form. I haven't had anybody fill out my guest form in a while, which means we have not had an interview show in a while. But at livingfreeintennessee.com, if you go there, in the upper menu navigation, which is a hamburger menu on your cell phone, or a burger menu. I'm sorry, I say hamburger because I remember things conceptually, not by exact words. It's how my brain works. There's a guest form, and you fill it out, and people get mad at me. It asks for your name, your email, the title of your show, 5 or 6 questions that I can ask you. I want your bio. I want links to your social media. And I want all of that, and your headshot if you have it, or you can email that to me. I want all of that so that when we do a show, it's efficient for my time. I am using the right links to all of your things and not sending to somebody to some other John Smith, right? And those 5 or 6 questions are your tool to get your message across if you put thought into them. and to have a really good interview. If you don't put thought into them, I can see you didn't put thought into them. And sometimes I'll still interview you. But, you know, you just missed a huge opportunity there. But that's also an efficiency for me because it weeds out marketing firms who are just coming to the podcast to sell you a book. Because they'll just paste in their like blurb without any questions. They don't read the form. And that's like, okay, not interviewing that person because they're not serious, right? It also ends up making my life a little bit easier because it helps guide the research I'm going to do for the interview. And it helps me spin the person in a good light because my podcast is not about gotcha. I'm not trying to gotcha somebody who wrote a really cool book about milking goats or somebody who has a really cool YouTube channel about biochar or whatever, right? And that is something that I think is different than like a news channel would be. Although if you're going to ask to be covered by the news, you send them your talking points in a press release. You do. And then they can either grab them or not grab them, but you send them out. This is what I want to talk to you about. This is my point. These are some questions you can ask, that sort of thing, because you want to make their job as easy as possible. Because frankly, our news people don't put in that much time as a general rule. Not all of them, but as a general rule, they're just looking to get their stuff out on a pretty aggressive schedule without having to do a lot of digging. This means the reporters that do a lot of digging are worth their weight in platinum, I would say. So that was probably the biggest time saver I ever had. And I got the idea from Jack Spirko of the Survival Podcast. There's no way that you cannot see that I did not steal that form directly from him. And almost everybody I know in our network who has started a podcast and started doing interview shows at some point very quickly has come to the idea that the guest form is a good way to get all of the information you need. It avoids emails back and forth. Anytime I can avoid the need to send an email or receive an email, you're going to do that. Because what you find when you start a podcast is you start getting a lot of email. The other place where people sink a lot of time in is audio editing, and they try to cut out their mistakes. Now, I know those of you who have listened to my podcast for a long time have heard me do two different things that are frustrating. One, I'm going to talk to you about this really cool plant in my yard, and it's called and there's a long pause. And then I start describing the plant and what it's used for. It's like, it's that medicinal plant, puts out lots of berries, and you make syrup for it that helps you fight off the flu and cold. Elderberry is the answer, by the way. Elderberry and mulberry in my head, when I'm talking on a podcast, sometimes those words switch. And I'm like, I'm using the wrong word. And so you'll hear me like trying to think of the word, and you are in your car going, like throwing your hand against the dashboard going, elderberry, Nicole, elderberry. The word's elderberry. Yeah. That's literally a word I have forgotten many, 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 many times. And I know the word elderberry, but sometimes when you're recording a podcast, it's elderberry. Now, I could go back and edit that out, or I could be real and just be like, hey, sometimes words come out of my head wrong. Like the hamburger menu is really a burger menu. Again, I lock things in conceptually, not the exact words sometimes, which can really be a challenge when you're talking about an elderberry plant and cannot come up with the word elderberry. But the other thing that I do and other podcasters do, I heard Jack Spirko do it last week. We use the wrong word. We use the opposite word of the word we were thinking in our head, and we don't even notice it happened. And again, you can go out and edit that out, but it's usually fairly obvious what you meant. And if you hear one, you can go on your next show and say, haha, funny thing happened. I used the wrong word. I think you can spend hours and hours and hours editing out every I have de-ummed an episode once when I had a guest on that said so many times that I took out about half their ums because it was just too ummified. But that took me 2 hours to edit. And usually, like literally this show, we're going to be done recording it. I'm throwing it into my editing software. I'm putting my intro music. I'm putting my outro music. I am exporting it, levelating it, uploading it, hitting go. And unless my internet's being just wonkily today, it'll be up 15 minutes after this episode. So if you waste a lot of time audio editing, then I think you're making a huge mistake. Unless your goal is to have a podcast like CJ Kilmer's Dangerous History podcast, where he does do that. But then that's like, it's sort of a different thing than sharing sort of life lessons, right? Or how to do homesteading. His is more like, I'm going to compare like 3 different things that happened from source documents in history. It's just a sort of a different thing. So just think about that and which one of those you want to do. I lean towards let it rip. Just let it rip. The other thing that's really helped me is pre-populating my website posts and social posts so that when I'm done or before I start a podcast or a live stream, it's all ready to go. So like right now at Living Free in Tennessee, if you had the login to my website, you would know that the post for today's podcast is all done. That's why I started at 3:30 today, because I started with, the vampire taking blood for my blood work and did a bunch of other stuff. And then I realized I need to record the podcast. And then I wrote the podcast notes. And then I did all of the posts and all of the things I'm going to do with it from a marketing standpoint. And then I started recording, because the easiest part of podcasting for me is this right here. It's the recording. And once that's done, I don't want to do all the stuff that annoys me, which is all like the posting of the posts and the uploading of that stuff isn't fun to me. So I do it first, make sure it's ready to go. And that means when I'm done recording this, I can just go bip, and then I can do a second workout for today for 75 hard, because that's next on my list. Pre-populating stuff like that is a trick that I learned along the way that I didn't used to do. And sometimes I would be like, I'd finish recording, I'd run outside to like clear my head, and then guess what? It was 11 o'clock at night and y'all still didn't have your audio podcast, even though I recorded it at 4. So it was something I learned to keep things streamlined. And then of course, everything is content. Like I used to trick people on Zello into answering questions and put that recording on my podcast, The Booze Whisperer, back in the Booze Whisperer days, because that was the only way to get content from him. And he had really good cocktail ideas. So you can think about that too. Everything's an opportunity. If you're interviewed by me on my podcast, you can say, hey, Nicole, can I have the audio for my podcast? And I'll be like, yeah. And I'll send it to you. You can run that same audio on your podcast. So there's lots of opportunities to do that. If you give a speech somewhere, you can run the audio on your podcast. I'm going to run the audio from my presentation that I did at the Exit and Build Land Summit as something in a week where it's really busy. And in fact, that week is coming soon. I think probably the one where I go to Oregon is where you're going to get that. It's just another way to do that. So Tori says, I need a faux booze whisperer. I think we have that. Lazy Gardener says, we tried de-umming the first couple episodes. It was a nightmare. Yeah. The best way to de-um your podcasts, guys, is to record your podcast, say I said a couple of times earlier in this podcast. Every time I did it, it was like nails on a chalkboard. I said the word again, and not just an when I'm talking about but I legitimately ummed earlier today. And listen to your podcasts, because that's the other thing. You start and then listen to your podcasts, and you will start hearing things you want to change about what you do. And then only work on one of those things at a time. You may hear 10 things you want to change. Choose one. If it's start working on your ums. Realize that the best replacement for the word is silence. And Tori's saying my is awkward giggles. The best replacement for awkward giggles is stop giggling. And it takes a while. What I had to do to de-ummify myself was stop moving. And my de-ummification came when I was standing in front of people speaking as a facilitator. So I would be walking around and I would be asking, this person to do that and them to do that and the other person to do the other thing. And ums would come out, or I'd be telling a story with gestures and ums would come out. And I realized when I feel an coming, if I'm gesturing and I freeze, the stops. It's the great stopping gesture. And that worked well for me. I still do from time to time. I'm not a perfect non-ummer, but I a lot less. And then I did replace with so for a long time. And somebody sent me an email. They missed my so episode. So, and what that was for me was connector words. So when you go from one sentence, when you go from one sentence to another topic, the word so connects it. And I had a list of 5 connector words up on my board for a long time to think about different ways to say it's time for the next segment. And then I realized, you know what you can do, Nicole? You can just start the next segment without a connector word. Oh my word, that's so brilliant. Like those things you only learn when you're recording your podcast. The next thing, and this is probably the most important thing that comes from your podcast, is learning to tap into your community, your network, and keep things growing. Because as you start a podcast, you'll have a few listeners. And the ones who keep coming back then are your diehard listeners for the rest of your life. Like Dory. Dory doesn't listen to every episode anymore, I don't think. But she came early on, and she has been a diehard supporter of my podcast from the very beginning. Many of you here in the live feed are basically on that list. And to ignore that would be conceited and a terrible idea, because my podcast would not have grown to where it is without you. Without you sharing it with your friends, without you encouraging me to keep going when I was ready to quit, without you giving me ideas or feedback when I did a topic that really resonated with you. If that had not happened, if I hadn't heard that and responded to that, the podcast would still have 14 listeners. And we all know the story, right? My first episode got 80 downloads, and everyone's like, that's pretty good. My second episode got 14. And one of those was me, and one of those was my mom. So I really had 12. There was a time where my download of my episodes actually made a difference in my numbers. Think about that. Everybody starts there. But what happens when you start a podcast is people start liking what you're saying, and they start asking you questions, and they start giving you feedback. I've actually got something that was mailed to me recently that I need to talk about on the podcast, but I need to reach out to the person and make sure I can say their name, because I want to say their name, but I don't know. It was a handwritten letter. Stuff like that starts happening, and you need to tap into that and empower that. And I think the best way to empower community is set a community standard. Like we have a community standard of empowerment of each other. And I don't tolerate petty fighting in our communities. I will kick people out who come in and hate. Somebody having a bad day is one thing, but people who just persistently are jerks get booted. And I do that because that suck on our energy in the community is way more harmful than trying to be welcoming of everybody, which I want to be welcoming, but not to jerks. Because there are so many of you who are so awesome and who put so much into the community, into helping each other, into troubleshooting things. And how would you feel if I let somebody just like drag you over the mud day in, day out? Because I don't want to kick somebody out. That wouldn't be nice. No. No, you need to be the leader in that situation and protect the people who very well can fight for themselves, but shouldn't have to in a group. And I think that lesson was hardest for me because I used to be a like welcome everybody person, and I didn't say no. And I've learned to say no a lot. Now let's talk about the money. You know, when you start a podcast, you're going to have riches beyond measure, right? You're doing this for free. You are doing your podcast because you're passionate about somebody and you're sharing that with people. CJ's passionate about history. He's sharing that with people. Does it monetize over time? It can. But if you go into your podcast with the goal that you're going to replace your income within 6 months without investment money, it's probably not going to happen. It would be very unusual. And I've coached people through developing podcasts who are like, but I need to make $20,000 a year off of this profit, or my wife's not going to let me do it. Okay, well, that your problem is not the podcast or how to make it make money. The problem is the rest of that sentence. The way I make money from the podcast is, of course, sponsors, which just happened this year. And it was when I finally thought I had an audience big enough that sponsors would benefit, right? That's why it took so long. And that's not the biggest chunk of money. That is certainly helpful, but it's not the biggest chunk of money. The webinars and training that we do, the books that I've written, the events. So if you think about what I do with events, people are like, how do you build these events so fast? Well, part of how I build these events so fast is y'all listen to my podcast and you hear about the events and you get excited about them and you come. And then you tell your friends to come and then they tell their friends to come. And then you introduce me to other content creators who talk about my events. And that's how that happens. Do I make a lot of money on events? No, but it's all of these things I'm chunking away at, right? The coffee. The first thing that I monetized on my podcast was the coffee. And it was within the first year because I was already roasting coffee. I talked about it on the podcast and people are like, well, how can we buy your coffee, Nicole? And I was like, well, I guess I better build the website. And so I did, right? And then I remember the first day I said, if you like my work here, you can support me by buying your coffee at Holler Roast. And somebody who started listening to my podcast early on, texted me later that day. And he was like, the exact quote, he was like, this is perfect. And Holler Roast coffee would have been a lot harder to build were there not a podcast community of people who like to drink coffee. Now, if some of you don't drink coffee at all, that's fine. Never feel guilty about that. The coffee business exists to give coffee to people who drink coffee. And if you don't, it's always people meet me and they're like, sorry, Nicole, I don't drink coffee. I'm like, it's fine. It's also fine if you buy my coffee and another craft roaster's coffee and you like us both. It's totally fine. It's just another chink in the armor of how I make money with it. Podcasting 2.0 has a lot of potential. I haven't made a lot of money on it, but the minute I found out how to get myself on Fountain and to get Satoshi tips, I did it. And I've made probably $1,000 that way. It's not a ton, but every little bit helps. And then the biggest thing is the social capital that's been built as a result of the podcast. Now, this is different than Jack Spirko's method. And if you talk to different podcasters, we've all monetized in different ways. It took me years to really replace my income. And it is not just talking into this microphone and putting a thing out. I do other work that is empowered by the podcast, and it all works as a cycle, right? So the podcast empowers the coffee and the events and the webinars and the speaking engagements, and all of that works in a circle. And if I stopped doing the podcast, the circle would hit a wall and that stuff would all start to go down. Now, there are things in that circle I can stop doing and replace by doing more of other things. And that works well. So if you think about it, I could stop roasting coffee and really just concentrate on just speaking engagements and making more video about homesteading. And I'd probably make about the same amount of money as I do roasting and selling coffee. Or I could cut the speaking engagements and just really focus on digital training. There's lots of different things I could change in that, but the podcast is sort of the catalyst of it all. And if I take the podcasting out, the whole thing falls apart. So that's the money. As I said, other people make money differently, like YouTube ads. I also tap into the little things. I make a tiny amount of money on YouTube. If I get kicked off YouTube, I care not because I make a tiny amount of money on YouTube and whatever. There's little avenues like that. If I had been able to keep my Amazon affiliate status, I probably would have made affiliate money there. I've made some affiliate money on EMP Shield, and I've made affiliate money on Harvest Right freeze dryers. So little things like that come up. I've made some commissions on selling other things, and that's the affiliate. I think there's a lot of potential in our network for a better affiliate system because we all cross promote each other's things already, right? And that's because we want to build the community, and that builds the social capital. But if there were a better and easier way to track who refers what and give somebody a little piece of that pie, I see that as a long-term potential for the community that we are building around us. But that might be a little bit of a tangent. That's future looking. The way this fits into the business and how it incorporates into other areas of life, I pulled out as a separate thing, even though I just kind of talked about it when I talked about the money. Because if you think about the businesses I run, what I don't do is a lot of paid advertising, because I put all of that effort into the podcast, and that's my paid advertising. I occasionally do paid advertising. Paid advertising is something that could help me at this hot minute expand a lot faster. But the way it fit in was I had more time than money when I started all of this. And that meant that I put a lot of time places rather than money places. And that math is different for everybody too. But this incorporates into my life in a way that's been better than any other work I've ever done, because this is about my life, right? This is about the businesses I'm building. This is about the community I want to see in the world and the change I want to see in the world. And that's why I love podcasting so much, is that it fits in so closely to how I want to live. So rather than having a job over here where I trade my time to make money to pay for the things I like to do, I have turned the things I like to do into the way I make money. Does that mean I'm always doing everything I want to do all the time? Heck no. I'm going to be doing a bunch of tax preparation for the next 3 weeks. And if you're on the video, you can see the look on my face. I'm like super happy about this. I love paperwork. I just love it. So there are pieces of what I do that I don't love. But what I've learned is front load those to get them done so I can do the things I do love as much as possible. And find ways to minimize those things. I have worked with a digital assistant a few times over the course of this here and there. And that's going to happen again some more, because there are people who love to do the things I don't love to do. And that's like a win-win. If we can make enough money together, then they get paid to do what they love. I get paid to do what I love, and I do less of the things I don't love. And that's really what I think about. But this is really a lifestyle business. Like, I'm not trying to make $1 billion empire that is called living free in Tennessee. And that would be it. Other people have different goals, and that's fine. My goal is more grounded in living the life I want to live in the way I want to live it, and having enough money to do the things I want to do. But it's also very important to me that that community element come together, and that we are together building a better world through example. Because every one person who opts out of the broken system that we have out there and agrees to take control of their life and to choose freedom and to live the way they want to live, every time that happens, that's the success I'm looking for, right? And then when they get somebody else to do it, then it starts spreading and spreading. And I think that is the best way to change the big problems we see out and talk about that we're afraid of. I think that way you have a long-term change rather than a short-term vote. And this is because I worked in public policy for 14 years, right? I would see, oh, good, we beat that bad law down. And then like the next year it was back and it passed. And it was like, well, that wasn't worth my time to fight, right? Wherein if people don't even consider the thought that they would even need to tap into that quote unquote opportunity being offered by the government, that renders that service, in air quotes, obsolete. That's why I do this, guys. It's because the more we take care of ourselves and our community, the less people there are the fewer people there are who are relying on a broken system or on basically using the force of government to do things government should have never done. So that's how it incorporates into other areas of my life. This Living Free in Tennessee podcast, along with everything else I'm doing, is completely intermingled with my mission in life, or the reason I'm on this planet. And because I'm able to do that, I am a lot, I think, happier or more balanced as a person because I've moved in that direction. But it took years to get here, and I'm still working on it. Like, I'm not here. I'm just, on my journey. I don't know if you ever arrive. I think you just keep doing better as well you can, as much better, or you keep doing better to the best of your ability until you can't do better anymore. And I don't know what can't do better anymore looks like, and I'm not sure I ever will. So that's just my perspective on that. The way you successfully interview people is research. The guest form really helps me a lot because it helps me know where to look when somebody applies to be on my show. But with that, I want to go look at what they're doing. I don't really like getting somebody on the show who I haven't seen talk or haven't seen what they write, because then I don't know where we're going. Now, I can wing it pretty well because I've interviewed people for a long time, so that's fine. But if you want to do successful interviews, think about, what is my purpose with this interview? At the end of this interview, I want my listeners to be able to do the following 3 things differently, for example. You could state it that way. That would be a really good, tangible way. Okay, with that in mind, what questions should I ask the person that will help my listeners do these 3 things differently? Don't be afraid to ask questions. At the same time, unless you are a gotcha podcast, don't try to gotcha people. And this actually happened on my podcast this year. Somebody said something about what they are building in their life that is completely counter to everything I teach here. And it was related to debt. They are at a point where they are taking on debt to grow their business into an empire. And so they're using other people's money to grow their business. Now, this is a very advanced financial concept that could go horribly wrong. And it's not one that I'm really into. I'm more into the pay off your debt and build, stay out of debt. Sure, you can leverage debt for things over time. But in general, I'm looking more at the other side of that, where I build a slow, steady empire rather than put things at risk that I'm not willing to put at risk to grow very, very quickly into something huge. I also don't want to be CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I know that about myself. I realized the other day, I feel things, and when something's wrong in my family, I have a hard time functioning because I feel things, and my family is really, really important to me. And I hear a lot of advice about, you have to just sacrifice that if you're going to be successful. Well, then I'm not going to be that form of successful because my family is really, really important to me. And they will continue to be really, really important to me. And I want to be in a position where I can prioritize my family. And when what that means is my family needs time, then my family gets time. And I don't just mean my biological family. I mean my family I chose, right? That's why I flew to Oklahoma and drove a dog back for 12 hours in the middle of a time when I should not have taken those 2 days. It wasn't just about the dog. I wanted to see Jenny in person during this time. And I will probably see her again if there's an opening for that sometime in the next 4 months. Because my family is very important to me, and I will take that time. When you take control of your income, you can do that, and it's not like, and now I got to convince my boss, right? So that's the thing. So anyway, you got to know stuff about yourself. I am not a gotcha thing. I am not trying to trap people into looking bad. And if somebody says something on my podcast that is counter to my opinion, I let them. And we may have a discussion about it here, but I'm not in it to have the epic battle about approach with somebody on my podcast. I could, and you guys would probably find that interesting, and maybe we'll do that someday, and that will be the purpose. But really, when I'm talking to somebody, I'm trying to pull out of them their story. And I'm trying to pull out of them useful things for you to learn from. And with that in mind, I'm not looking to get into a fist fight, right? Only interview people you think are interesting and use the form. Like, really get good at that. I will admit that Joel Salatin did not fill out my form. But most people fill out my form. Jack Spirko fills out my form. Not for the Tuesday Lives, but when he's been on my show, he fills out my form. And that is just how we get this organized. Otherwise, we risk having a problem. The other thing the form does, as I said earlier, all of the right social media in the right place. Very important. Now, you'll notice we are now, I don't know, how long have we been going here? Hour 20 minutes into my podcast. And I have not talked about gear or software or any of that because none of it matters. But okay, I guess I'll talk about that. Oh, first of all, let me answer this question. If you don't have a community to get ideas from, where should you pull episode ideas? From your community. You do have a community to get ideas from. It's called Telegram. Also, just giving you the look. That's where you get it. You talk to people and you will get ideas. And you have a lot of community around you if you are even in this chat. You can ask us for ideas. I'm trying to think about what I want to do. And guys, I need help. People do that all the time on Telegram and on MeWe. So use it. Also, I made her laugh. That look, guys, when we were at dinner, I kept giving Tori that look and she said, "Don't look at me like that." And I sent her a picture of it on Telegram earlier because it's this look I give. Anyway, so the gear I use. I have a Scarlett Solo box that is made by i2i. What is it? Or 2i2. And it's like, I don't know what it costs now, but it cost me $89. It's probably $115 now. And that allows me to plug a microphone or a 1/4 inch input in. It has a gain control so I can control volume. And then it goes USB into my computer. And then it records. Now, what I used to use to record was GarageBand because I have a MacBook that's my computer and it came with GarageBand on it. And I already knew how to use GarageBand because I was a musician. So I just use GarageBand for editing the podcast episodes. You don't have to use that. You can use any of the other audio editing software programs that podcasters recommend. It literally does not matter. What it's going to do is allow you to have different tracks and control volume and control tone and cut out background noise and all of these other things that if you control for when your audio in is going in, then you don't have to deal with it on the editing side. So my recommendation is find a quiet room and adjust your mic to where it works and make it so you minimally have to edit. Once I'm done recording through that Scarlett Solo, I actually have a different Scarlett box that allows 2 inputs now, but I also have the Scarlett Solo box for when I'm traveling. I have a Rode NT1 microphone that's a condenser mic that has phantom power that I have to turn on through my Scarlett box for it to even work. And by the way, if you leave that on for a month because you forgot to turn it off, it will fry your mic, so don't do that. This is my second Rode NT1. I've used this for recording vocals and rock and roll for a long time. It has a little pop filter you can put over it. I don't use that. I just don't go up to it and go loud P noises, and then I don't have a problem. So I have that. I have this really cool boom thing on my mic that allows me to put it somewhere. This appeared in my life when Unloose the Goose started because JR was like, you need a better way to have your mic there, because I just had a little mic stand in front of me and he thought this would be cooler. He was right. I have a lighting rig that lights me up from 3 different angles if I want it to, that has diffused lighting with umbrellas that somebody sent me because they didn't like the way my face looked when I was on. See, you guys see how the community starts adding up? I knew to get the Scarlett Solo box because I had a friend who was a sound engineer and I said, how do I do this? And he said, buy this. And then I figured it out. I go output to a set of studio speakers and a studio amplifier made for professional sound mixing. Why? because I sang rock and roll. You know what I could use instead? USB speakers that plug into your computer. I just happen to have this. It's from the 90s. Like, I told him the other day I still had this thing, and he laughed so hard because I bought it from my sound engineer friend when he didn't like it because there's a specific frequency where these don't mix accurately if you're trying to master a CD, and it doesn't matter for a podcast, right? So that's what I have, and I don't remember what brand these are, but I'll put the link in the show notes. This wireless mic is great because it can go into your cell phone, or it can go into the Scarlett Solo box, and that's kind of nice when you're doing videos outside and you want people to hear you. And the only problem is if it's windy, what you get is, yeah, you heard that, right? I can make wind noises in my microphone even if there isn't wind. I'm good like that. That's the gear I have. Other things you may want to look at, though, is they have podcasting mics that go straight to USB that work great. And they have mute buttons on them, which is kind of cool. And then you don't need the whole Scarlett Solo box. What I like about the Scarlett Solo box is I can interview 2 people with this one now in one room. But I never do it because it left-right adjusts it, and then I have to mess with it in audio formatting later. So if I'm going to interview 2 people, I'm going to use a mixing board that I have for a PA system. None of that stuff matters, guys. What matters is starting the podcast. What software do I use? Already talked about it. Here's the thing. I output a WAV file, and I got this program called Levelator, and they have it for PC and for Mac. And you can take your audio file and put it in there, and it compresses it so your louds get less loud and your quiets get louder, and it's easier for people driving in their cars to listen to. This is particularly important when you interview somebody. Their mic might not be as good as yours. So that is a program that can take your podcast from not that great of audio production to it sounds really good. Outputs it to a WAV file. I translate that into an MP3 file so the file size is smaller, and then I put it out on my podcast feed. Let's talk about the podcast feed. The way you get a podcast feed is you have a website that has blog posting capacity, and you take your audio file, upload it somewhere on a server, and then you can use a plugin on your website that brings the audio file into your blog post, or you can just link to it on your blog post. That blog system will have a thing called an RSS feed. And many sites, it's like livingfreeintennessee.com/RSS or rss.livingfreeintennessee.com, or there's different ways to get there. There may be a specific one that's like /blog, whatever. You find that RSS feed for all your blog posts, and that is the link that you need to submit to iTunes. So the first thing you do is you go to Apple, you set up an account, you submit your blog to iTunes. It asks you to fill out stuff. It asks you to put that link in. You need to already have audio like posts on your website for that. And then they dick around for a couple weeks deciding if you're real. And then one magic day, your podcasts exist. Now, the fastest I've gotten this done was 3 days. The longest it took me, which was living free in Tennessee, was 2 weeks. Once Apple knows you exist, a whole bunch of other podcast players take their feed from Apple iTunes, and that means that you don't have to register individually there. So you get that done, and then you're done. Now, if you don't have a website, you can use a podcast producing tool like Libsyn, or I think SoundCloud does it. There are places where you can just do it and they do all that for you. That's the easy button, but then they have control of your audio. So if you don't have backups of your audio, you could lose it all, or you could over traffic their system and they could shut you down. So those are the 2 ways to do it. I personally currently still use Libsyn, but I have a backup of all my audio files, and I am in the process of moving off of their system because my internet and their system aren't getting along since their latest update, and it was time for me to move on anyway. I'm of a size where I should be hosting my own audio, but you don't have to. And that's the thing. We go back to just get it done and start building your following and start building your audience, and just record, get it done, and the people will come. And then somebody will be like, hey, you need to get on like I don't remember what it's called, but like Google Podcast. How come you're not there? You're like, type in Google Podcast. Oh, look, I can register. So what'll happen is once you're on iTunes, people will say, I really wish you were on Spotify or whatever. And then you can go over and sign up for Spotify and submit your RSS feed there, and then you're on Spotify. That's how that works. So what I did is I got on iTunes and Spotify, and then people started complaining about me not being here or there, and then I did it. Now I'm on Fountain. I'm on Fountain twice. You know why? Because when I set up my feed through Libsyn, I have a feed for my website and they have a feed for me too. And somehow Fountain thinks I'm two different podcasts. I've got to deal with that. It's part of why I'm getting off of Libsyn. That's just a warning. If you end up with two feeds submitted places, things can get confusing. But it's not a deal breaker. It has not hindered my ability to get these audio podcasts onto your podcasters at all. I just occasionally get people saying they want to send me lightning on on Fountain. They're like, you should claim your podcast. And I'm like, I did. It's this other one over here. Anyway, I think that's everything I've covered for lessons learned after 7 years of podcasting. It's been a really interesting journey. I had no idea how well I would just align with the podcasting platform. And I wish in 2008, when I first thought I might start a podcast, I had. But it seemed too hard at that time. And that's my regret, is that I didn't start in 2008. I started in 2016, 8 years later. And if I would have just started, think about how far along we'd be now. Right? And that's why I say the tools don't matter. What matters is that you get what comes out of your mouth posted somewhere into an RSS feed and registered on iTunes and out there, and you start sharing it with people. And once you do that, the rest will come. The efficiencies will come. If you are consistent, the listeners will come. If you react to the things your listeners say, you will grow over time. But I really think that building a podcast has to be a passion of building something and not just in it for the instant payoff, because there isn't an instant payoff. There is a long tail. There is a long, long, long tail. And it's been worth every minute of it. I love doing it. Anyway, if you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can support me in two ways. One, consider becoming a member. That's at livingfreeintennessee.com. Two, get your coffee where? HollerRoast.com. That website I had to build because y'all were asking me where to get the coffee I roasted. That's HollerRoast.com. We've gone from a side hustle to a full-time gig. I'm proud of that, man. And you guys helped me build it. So thanks for that. We'll be back tomorrow, 9:30 live with Jack Spirko and John Willis. And then that will be the audio podcast for Wednesday. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.